All right, thank you so much. I'll go ahead and give my nod to the secretary that we're ready to begin recording. Okay, welcome to the Senate Committee on Growth and Infrastructure. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Senator Brooks,
Here.
Senator Hammond,
Here.
Senator Pickard,
Here.
Senator Spearman, Chair Harris.
Here, and we will mark Senator Spearman present as she arrives. Actually, I see her.
I'm here, but I can't, I'm not getting any sound. And it's all the way up on 100, but I'm not getting any sound.
Okay, Senator, we're going to go ahead and go into a short recess and see if we can get BPS to take care of you. Okay, let's go to a recess at the call of the chair.
Yes, please stand by. All right, we are unmuted and you are good to go.
Okay, Madam Secretary, we are back on the record. And would you please just call the roll one more time for us?
Senator Brooks,
Here.
Senator Hammond,
Still here.
Senator Pickard,
Still here.
Senator Spearman,
Here.
Chair Harris.
Here, there are 5 members present. We have a quorum. Just a friendly reminder, please be courteous and respectful with others during this meeting, even if you disagree with another person's position. And for those participating on Zoom, please be sure to mute your microphone when you are not speaking. The first item on our agenda today is a presentation on the state climate strategy. We have with us the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, as well as the Governor's Office of Energy. I believe we should have Bradley Crowell, Director of the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, Greg Lovato, Administrator of the Division of Environmental Protection, Kristen Avert, I hope I said that correct, State Climate Policy Coordinator, and David Bobzian, Director of the Governor's Office of Energy. I will turn it all over to you all.
Thank you, Chair Harris. Can you hear us okay? Great. It's Averett. I'll do that for Dr. Averett now. And yes, it's not easy. You got to learn it once and then you get it. So yes, thank you, Chair Harris and members of the committee. My name again is Bradley Crowell. I'm the Director of the Nevada Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. We appreciate you convening this important hearing today to discuss the climate goals, Nevada's climate goals, challenges, and opportunities, and specifically to present to you the highlights from Nevada's first state climate strategy. I'm joined today by my colleagues, David Bobzian, Director of the Governor's Office of Energy, Dr. Kristen Averett, who is serving as Nevada's first climate coordinator, and I'm also joined today by Greg Lovato, the Administrator of the Nevada Division of Environmental Protection. The state climate strategy that we're going to discuss today is designed to serve as a roadmap for the Nevada Legislature, as well as local officials and stakeholders, to develop and implement new Nevada-specific policies and programs to reduce all forms of greenhouse gas emissions in Nevada in a strategic manner that will achieve 2 key objectives. 1, to meet the ambitious greenhouse gas reduction targets set by the legislature in 2019, and 2, to maximize the economic opportunities for Nevada in the transition to a clean technology economy. While Nevada has long been a leader in clean energy generation by way of our vast renewable energy resources, and as one of the first states to establish a renewable portfolio standard, our work to further mitigate greenhouse gas emissions and address the impacts of climate change to Nevada have only recently begun in earnest. Building on the success of the RPS, Nevada must now broaden its focus and actions to address climate pollution across all economic sectors in Nevada. My colleagues will discuss further the key sectors Nevada must focus on swiftly to achieve the goals we've set for our state and to be a leader amongst our peers in other states for climate action. Fortunately, this critical work also presents significant opportunities for Nevada's economic recovery, lasting economic diversification, and creating new, good-paying jobs through investments in modern, climate-resilient infrastructure throughout the state. Next slide. Our efforts to more broadly tackle climate change began in earnest in 2019 under Governor Sisolak's leadership when he joined Nevada with the U.S. Climate Alliance. The current membership of the alliance includes 25 states with both Democratic and Republican governors, representing over 50% of the U.S. population. As an alliance member, Nevada is committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions 26 to 28% by 2025. In exchange, Nevada receives valuable technical and analytical support from the alliance to help track our emissions profile and offer input for policy designs that will work best for Nevada. Next slide. Also in 2019, as a complement to Nevada's membership in the Climate Alliance, the Nevada Legislature passed 2 important bills to enhance Nevada's focus on climate change. The first, SB 358, increased Nevada's RPS to 50% clean electricity generation by 2030. The second, SB 254, established in statute economy-wide greenhouse gas reduction milestones for Nevada. The greenhouse gas reduction goals set by SB 254 are as follows: 28% by 2025 and 45% by 2030, as well as net zero by 2050. Thankfully, the enhanced RPS under SB 358 will play a significant role in meeting these targets, but the RPS alone will not be sufficient to achieve our greenhouse gas reduction targets in 2025 and 2030. Next slide. As you can clearly see in this next slide, this is Nevada's most recent greenhouse gas emissions projections. We are currently projected to fall 4% short of our 2025 goal and 19% short of the 2030 goal. However, by working together to design smart climate policy for Nevada, we can still meet these goals if we act now. With that, I will turn it over to Director Bobzian to discuss the actions we are taking now to mitigate climate pollution from various sources, but much more still needs to be done. Director Bobzian.
Thank you, Director Kroll, and thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, for allowing me to spend some time with you this afternoon. David Bobzian, Director of the Governor's Office of Energy. Continuing forward with the work that was done in 2019 on climate, in November of 2019, the Governor signed Executive Order 2019-22, which further, I think, makes the point that we have made much progress when it comes to clean energy generation and the renewable portfolio standard, but we have other sectors of the economy that we now need to focus on for our climate action. And so the goals of the executive order, again, are to move beyond just the consideration of clean energy, but also to address statewide impacts of climate change, wildfire, critical infrastructure, drought, wildlife, et cetera. So the effort under the executive order for the administration was co-led by the Nevada Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, as well as the Governor's Office of Energy. The milestone that was placed for us, we met, was developing the state climate strategy by December 1 of 2020, last year. And we're, again, pleased to be with you this afternoon to present that report to you. Next slide. But even with the executive order and the development of the climate strategy, we have numerous examples of the administration not waiting to act on this. There's been a lot of activity in the climate space. Clean Cars Nevada, probably at the top of the list for notable actions. And this is the development of new regulations to make more available low and zero emission passenger vehicles for consumers in Nevada. We have a lot of activity around the Volkswagen settlement and the funds derived from that. A lot of activity from Division of Environmental Protection for the replacement of diesel school buses, transit buses, and other vehicles. And also a lot of work with ground support equipment at both McCarran and Reno Tahoe airports, replacing those with electric options. And then also the GHG emissions reduction strategy from the Department of Transportation. This is a wonderful example of a lead by example effort on the part of NTOT to consider climate in all of their activities and operations. Next slide, please. And of course, when we talk about the Volkswagen settlement, it's also important to note the Nevada Electric Highway and the milestones that have been hit on that. I-15 is now completed and eligible for designation as a federal alternative fuels corridor for EV as a corridor designation. We're still working on Interstate 80, US 50, 95, and 93. Those are scheduled for substantial completion in 2021. We have a lot of activity in enhanced energy efficiency standards. You may recall an assembly bill from last session that led Nevada to establishing new light bulb energy efficiency standards. The annual cost savings for average Nevada households comes out to $81. And also you'll see examples of, again, climate change and addressing climate change being handled at the individual agency level. Probably the best example is climate features front and center if you review the Public Utilities Commission of Nevada and their strategic report really puts climate change right at the front of the report. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Averitt, our state climate coordinator, who can present the strategy to you.
So good afternoon, Kristen Averitt for the record, and thank you, Chair Harris, for the opportunity to present on the climate strategy a bit today. So as Director Bobzian pointed out, we are already seeing a tremendous amount of action around climate across the entire state. And with the recognition of the need to tie all of this action together and have a home for climate as we move forward, Governor Sisolak launched his Nevada Climate Initiative in August of 2020. Its mission to ensure a healthy, vibrant, climate resilient future for all Nevadans. With this in mind, when we designed the climate strategy, we wanted to ensure that it provides the scaffolding around which the entire state of Nevada climate initiative can be built. The strategy is about laying the foundation for the broader initiative and really creating a legacy of climate action for our state. So there are three overarching goals for the state climate strategy. The first, to provide a framework for reducing Nevada's greenhouse gas emissions across all economic sectors. The second, lay the groundwork for climate adaptation and resilience. That is, how are we going to deal with the impacts of climate change that are baked into our system? And then third, to establish a structure for continued ongoing climate action across the state. Now, in order to build the strategy and meet the broad scope of the executive order, we set up 10 different working groups focused on different aspects of climate change. These teams included 56 individuals representing 15 state agencies, including our 3 research institutions within NSHE, and we were particularly proud that we were able to involve 6 students in the crafting of the climate strategy. Working with stakeholders was, of course, another very important component in building the strategy. Beyond one-on-one meetings, small group briefings, and the seminar presentations that we had the opportunity to give, we had 2 key stakeholder engagement activities. The first was a scientific survey that was developed by UNLV faculty, where we asked Nevadans about what they care about as it relates to climate change. And then the second was a series of listening sessions focused on different climate topics. And these listening sessions, these were convened by representatives from different state agencies, but they were not about us presenting to the public. It was about hearing from Nevadans. So in this spirit, at every listening session, we accommodated every request for public comment. And we do have archives of these, should you be interested, on our website at climateaction.nv.gov. So on to the strategy itself. We did release the strategy to the public on December 1st on our website, and you can find it at climatestrategy.nv.gov. And we released this document in a web format, and we did this for 2 primary reasons. The first is that we wanted it to be approachable. Given the scope of the executive order, the strategy is necessarily quite comprehensive, and there is a lot of material. All told, if we were to print it all out, single-spaced, with 10.5-point font, it would be 150 pages. So as a print version, read in serial, that could be fairly overwhelming. So we structured a landing page that really allows people to dig in on the issues that are most interest to them and what they think is most important. The second reason is that web-based formats lend themselves to the concept of a living document. The strategy is intended to be used. It's not intended to sit on a shelf. We really want to be able to have a platform where we can expand and dig deeper into different components of the strategy as we move forward and develop different roadmaps towards climate action in our state. So with that, I'm going to provide you an overview of the individual components of the strategy at this point. Okay, so the first section of the strategy is about what we do and what we don't know about climate change in Nevada. This was led by our state climatologist at UNR, Dr. Stephanie McAfee, and the team was composed of, I would argue, the best climate scientists in our state from UNLV, UNR, and DRI. Now, this section represents the first climate assessment that has been done very specifically for the state of Nevada. And it is, I will say, it is fairly complex. However, there are 2 things in this section that I would direct you to. The first is a table of climate impacts that is at the very start of this section of the strategy. This table lays out how the impacts of climate change affect different sectors across the state, including public health, agriculture, tourism, as well as water resources. And the second thing I would encourage you to look at is at the very end of the section. And this is where the team lays out the risks that are posed to Nevada by climate change. All told, this particular section of the strategy, it is the baseline work that's really necessary for us to develop a very detailed risk assessment to ensure that Nevadans are resilient to the impacts of climate change. So the next section of the strategy is about what Nevadans think, and it includes the initial results from that scientific survey about climate that was conducted by UNLV. And the key takeaway here is that Nevadans they're concerned about climate change. The initial results show that over 75% of those who responded to the survey are very concerned about the climate, and the issue that they're most concerned about is drought. There are many other insights to be gleaned from the climate survey, and I recently had a discussion with Professor Bloomfield from UNLV who led the study, and she indicated that they will have additional results shortly that we will be able to share. So next, I'm going to dive into what really is the centerpiece of this iteration of the strategy, our mitigation policy analysis. And what we did here was we developed a framework that would help policymakers, help all of you, to effectively shape climate solutions that work for Nevada. Then we applied this framework to very specific climate mitigation policies. Now, the first question that we're always asked is, how did we select the policies that we included in the climate strategy? Where did they come from? Well, if you recall, per SB 254, the NDEP greenhouse gas inventory is required to include a catalog of potential policies that could be implemented in our state to help us achieve our emissions reduction targets. So all of the mitigation focused policies that are included in the strategy, they were drawn directly from the policy catalog that was included in the 2019 iteration of the NDEP greenhouse gas inventory. And for convenience, we included the relevant text from the policy catalog in the strategy, and we included links to the different parts of the strategy that address the policies, programs, or the concepts that were called out in that NDEP catalog. I will also add that the policies in the NDEP inventory, they come primarily from those that are being considered or have been implemented by other states that are part of the US Climate Alliance. So all told, we specifically evaluated 17 different climate mitigation policies across 5 different economic sectors. Now at this point, there are 2 things that I really want to be sure to make clear. The first, we did not develop any new mitigation focused policies in the strategy. And then the second is that we did not make specific recommendations to implement these policies as is, nor did we prioritize one policy over another. And the reason, well, quite frankly, we have to get to 0 emissions by 2050. So we're at a point where we need to consider all of our options and nothing is off the table. So the approach that we took was to evaluate these 17 different mitigation policies. And then we provided a pathway to figure out how we can make each of these work for Nevada. And the way that we did this was through the design of our policy framework. All right, so the framework, I'm gonna walk through this. The framework was comprised of 4 different metrics. The first metric, what is the potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and on what time frame should this particular policy be implemented? The second, climate justice. What impacts might the policy have on low-income households, communities of color, indigenous populations, and other marginalized communities? Do we know? And is there the opportunity for a net benefit for these historically marginalized communities? Third, budget. What does it cost to implement? What about the cost to administer any related programs attached to the policy? And then the fourth metric, implementation feasibility. This is about legal barriers to decarbonization. Essentially, do we have the authority in statute already? Or is this something where we actually need federal action to move forward with implementing this particular option? So for each of the 17 policies, the relevant climate working groups that I mentioned earlier, they applied this framework. They assessed the state of the knowledge on the topic for each issue, they dug into the research, and they incorporated the input that we received from the listening sessions and through our stakeholder engagement activities. Then they assigned a color designation based on what we do and what we don't know for each metric. So at this point, I'm going to walk through an example for each metric that's connected to a specific policy. And hopefully this will show you how this framework and this part of the climate strategy can help all of us to shape our policies so they work for Nevada. So for the first metric, let's take, for example, the policy analysis for the transition from fossil fueled electricity generation to clean energy sources. In this particular write-up, the team points out that we have 2 coal-fired power plants currently operating in the state, and we have a fairly good idea of what the greenhouse gas emissions are that are associated with both of those plants. However, we do not have a good idea of the exact timing of the retirement of both of those power plants. Consequently, we're really not sure whether or not these retirements could help us meet our 2025 and 2030 emissions reduction targets. So the working group team, they assigned not the dark green, but they assigned a green designation for this particular metric. Now, the point here is that just because this wasn't assigned a dark green, this doesn't mean that a policy can't be implemented. What we're doing is we're highlighting an issue that needs attention in the development of a policy. In this particular case, we're pointing out that if we're going to use the transition from coal-fired generation to clean sources to meet our near-term goals, there may need to be guardrails in place that would direct the timing of those retirements. So now let's consider the climate justice metric. And in this one, we're looking at the analysis of the transition from residential and commercial use of natural gas. Now, in this case, research clearly shows that the use of indoor gas appliances, and very specifically gas ovens, can compromise indoor air quality. And children are actually particularly vulnerable to this. Those children that are living in homes with gas stoves and gas ovens are 42% more likely to have asthma than children that don't. And so this transition could have very clear positive health outcomes. On the other hand, we heard from Nevadans loud and clear through our stakeholder engagement concerns about the costs associated with replacing natural gas appliances, as well as concerns about, hey, I don't have access to electricity, so I rely on natural gas. So clearly, there are issues that require discussion and balance, as we necessarily must transition from natural gas in order to meet our net zero 2050 target. With the economic metric, we took a slightly different approach. We actually looked at the investments that other states are making to support implementation and administration of similar policies. In other words, what kind of appropriations were states making? How many FTEs are necessary? What does it really take in terms of state investment to make these policies happen? In this particular example, we show an estimate of the number of FTEs in states that are implementing or have implemented clean car standards. So this gives us an idea of what kind of investments might be required to support similar policies should they be adopted here in Nevada. And then finally, implementation feasibility. I will say that the content for this particular metric across all of the policies was led by the Attorney General's office and by faculty and students from the UNLV Boyd Law School. And the idea with this metric is to lay out a possible roadmap for implementing a policy. In this particular example related to energy audits, the team laid out where the authority to make this happen should exist and provided a fairly clear path forward that in this case would likely require legislation in order to enact. So hopefully this overview of our policy framework and just walking through these 4 metrics, hopefully this illustrates how this section can help all of you, this committee, and policymakers really to shape climate policies so that they'll work for our state. So moving on to the next section of the strategy, complex challenges for Nevada. Right now, we're faced with the need to reduce and completely ameliorate greenhouse gas emissions. We also need to prepare and plan for more frequent reconciling environmental justice issues. Tackling climate change is complicated. It is not straightforward. I mean, if it was easy, we would have solved it already. But finding solutions is not necessary. It's not insurmountable. We can do it. So our approach to this section was to lay bare all of the issues at play within 4 key themes that are focused on the need for economy-wide greenhouse gas emissions reductions: transportation transformation, transmission planning and grid modernization, urban planning and green buildings, and land use and natural and working lands. Now, by laying out all the complexities, which we do in this section of the strategy, and then acknowledging all the stakeholder concerns, this allows us to identify who is invested in these issues, who's impacted, who has the authority and who has the influence to affect change. And this is what helps us to define who needs to be at the table to come up with solutions. Because oftentimes people might not realize that what they're doing can have an impact on climate action. And we need to make sure that they're at the table at the start. And an important point that we also try to make in this section is that climate mitigation, that is reducing greenhouse gases, is not mutually exclusive with respect to climate adaptation. That is dealing with the impacts of climate change. Treating these separately gives a distorted perspective that does not consider the entire portfolio of risk. So for example, most of these big issues that we just laid out, large-scale mitigation actions, they involve significant financial investments to retool or deploy new infrastructure around, say, mass transit, highways, new development, or anything, of course, related to energy infrastructure. But this infrastructure itself may be vulnerable to natural hazards, which are, in many cases, becoming more frequent, more intense, and more unpredictable. So to manage future risk in planning, we must integrate the medium and long-term vulnerabilities to infrastructure that are posed by an increasingly volatile environmental conditions. Finally, in this section, we can't pretend that a single action is going to solve climate change. And it won't just be federal action alone or state action that will provide the solutions. We need to develop a catalog of, policies, programs, plans that are coordinated and harmonized across different levels of governance. Only then are we going to be able to optimize our investments in climate action and truly make sure that we get to zero before 2050. And this segues nicely into the next section of the strategy, which is focused on monitoring, modeling, and managing greenhouse gas emissions. My top line summary of this section is you can't manage what you can't count. And so, of course, we're all aware that NDEP has its own greenhouse gas inventory and own platform for developing this inventory. However, there's a relatively long list of entities across the state who are developing or have already adopted their own greenhouse gas inventory process. So similar to the point that I just described in the complex challenges section about the need to harmonize our policies, we also need to coordinate in our accounting. Right now, for example, Clark County could implement a policy that's geared towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and it might be captured in their inventory. But because of the differences in accounting, modeling, or even data availability, at the state level, we might not capture those reductions that are a consequence of implementing that specific policy. And now this is not a bean counting issue. This is not just about the state wanting to take credit or anything for every action that everybody is taking. This is important for projecting the impact of a policy on greenhouse gas emissions. That way we can chart our path forward across the entire state, because it could actually be the implementation of a policy in Clark County that will help us to best optimize our reductions and help us meet our greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets. So for this reason, we need a greenhouse gas inventory framework that's integrated across the state, incorporates up-to-date Nevada-specific data, and is in sync with existing planning cycles. So another section of the strategy is focused on lead by example, which is the term of art for adopting internal strategies across our state agencies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And Director Bobzian already alluded to this, but right as we were beginning to build the climate strategy, NDOT started the process of developing and implementing their own internal policies to help them reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. NDOT made a significant contribution to the climate strategy in that they documented their process. And the result is a roadmap that any other agency can pick up and adopt for their own use to develop their own internal policies that will help them to maximize their reductions in, maximize reductions in their greenhouse gas emissions. Next, the next section, this is where we address the economics of climate action. Now, a few minutes ago, I described how when we analyze the individual climate policies, that we described how other states are making investments. Bottom line is addressing climate change is not a revenue neutral proposition. It requires upfront investment. but it will cost a lot more in the long run if we don't act. In this section of the strategy, we conducted an analysis using what's termed the social cost of carbon. And this allowed us to estimate the avoided costs of meeting our greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets. Even using a conservative approach to this calculation, if we meet the net zero carbon reduction target, we would prevent $4 billion in economic damages by 2050, $4 billion. And again, that is a conservative estimate. The ROI on the investments we make in climate action today will pay off in the long run. So following on the thread of economics is, of course, economic recovery and revitalization. The takeaway from this section, Nevada can and should ensure that climate action is part of the state's economic recovery, resilience, and job growth efforts, and that it really becomes hardwired into the state's economic development plans. This section was really framed around 3 pillars. The first, and this is to quote the US Climate Assessment, climate change is expected to cause substantial net damage to the US economy. Between 1980 and 2017, climate change actually cost the US economy over $1.2 trillion. And a significant contributor to these costs are the increasing number of extreme climate disasters that have been occurring across our nation. The massive rain and snowstorms in the West that we just experienced, $51 billion over the last 40 years. The 2012 to 2015 drought, that cost us $55.7 billion. But we can prepare and ensure the resilience of our economy. And one way that we can do this is the focus of the second pillar. It's about climate-friendly jobs. We have tremendous opportunities in our state to amplify job creation, be it through clean energy tech, transportation, or water conservation. Nevada can demonstrate how to mobilize a climate-friendly economy across many different sectors. And then finally, workforce development, training, and education. Our NSHE institutions, and very specifically the community colleges, they can support building a workforce skill set for emerging industries. And our research institutions can contribute further through R&D and innovation that is directly connected with the state's climate action goals. And this brings me to the last section of the strategy, which is about climate governance. And I would argue that this is probably the most important section of the strategy. If Nevada is going to be positioned to respond to climate change, a robust climate governance structure needs to be established. So based on the positive experiences of other states, as well as insights from scientific research, there are 6 guiding principles that should be adhered to when developing a climate-focused organizational structure. The first, intergovernmental and interagency coordination. This is a theme that is really, it's stitched throughout the entire strategy. We need to be working together in order to tackle the challenges of climate change. The second, stakeholder and community engagement. We must have people at the table from the start. And I just have to emphasize very specifically that ensuring that our communities are at the table at the beginning of discussions is particularly important for reconciling environmental justice issues. The third, science-based climate assessment. As the science of climate change evolves and we learn more, our risks and vulnerabilities will also change. So it's critical that decision makers are provided with the best available science, technology, and engineering insights, so that way this information can be considered in developing sound public policy. Adaptive governance. With the multiple challenges posed by climate change and the need to quickly pivot to address emerging issues, it can't be bogged down in too much bureaucracy. It needs to be nimble. Executive leadership and staff. Given the multiple scales of coordination that are really necessary across sectors and really transcend all governmental jurisdictions, dedicated leadership with a distinct focus on climate change should be in place. Otherwise, climate as a priority gets lost in the shuffle. High-level climate-focused leadership is what's needed to ensure that climate action sustains momentum and progresses in a timely manner and is truly integrated into decision-making. And then finally, dedicated resources. as we've said, upfront investment in climate action can prevent significant future economic damages. And when we take this all together, if Nevada is going to navigate the climate-related challenges and capitalize on the opportunities that are ahead, it's critical that we design and implement a durable organizational structure that has clear processes and related authorities. So I'm going to leave you with this last slide which really just summarizes the key takeaways from the strategy. Climate change is happening, Nevadans want action, and we can do something about it. And this strategy, what we've done here, it is fairly sweeping. There is a lot of content in here. But in my professional opinion, it's going to take that robust climate-focused governance structure to realize the tactical implementation of everything that we've laid out here in the climate strategy. This is what we need to ensure that that scaffolding that we're putting in place right here really cements the legacy of the State of Nevada Climate Initiative. So thank you for the opportunity to present. And at this point, I'd like to turn it back to directors Bob Zien and Kroll.
Thank you, Dr. Averett. Chair Harris, we're happy to take questions now. This last slide is just a reiteration of our desire and intent to work with you all to design good policies, and please fire away.
All right, it does look like we have some questions from a few members, but first I just wanted to thank you all for all of the work that you've done and your thorough presentation on that work, and let you all know that the Senate committee stands as a partner in reaching these lofty goals. I'll turn it over to Senator Pickard for a question.
Hey, Madam Chair, I just have a few questions. I mean, I am not one of these, I think the term is climate deniers. I mean, it is what it is. We can observe it. And so I think that it's wise for us to be looking at this. That as a backdrop, I'm wondering, I have kind of a general question and then a couple of specific ones, if I may, Madam Chair. First, if we were to adopt all of the recommendations, say we were to do that in the next, I assume, I don't know how many bills are going to put this together, but say in the next session or two, we were to adopt all of the recommendations. Do we know how much this will improve the climate in Nevada? Are these things going to accumulate, and are they cumulative and substantial enough that we're going to see a noticeable change? Or are we assuming that these are part of a more global effort and assume that everyone else in the world is doing the same thing before we see any measurable improvements?
Senator Pickard, this is Brett Kroll, Director, Nevada Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. I'll take first shot at that, and my colleagues will likely add on. So the strategy is not intended to be a set of recommendations for adoption in whole. It's supposed to be a roadmap for adoption of policies at the right time to meet the targets that are in front of us. Now, if you look at the near-term challenges we have in front of us to meet our 2025 goals and 2030 goals, we really need to focus heavily on electrifying the transportation sector, in improving the efficiency of our residential and commercial buildings, and lowering industrial emissions from industrial processes, largely the result of the use of HFCs. And I'm happy to have Greg Lovato, our administrator of NDP, go into those sectors more if you'd like more background. But in the near term, the legislature, if we focus on those areas, that will allow us to meet our near-term goals. We want to be smart as we look at our emissions profile to choose the sectors that need to be addressed most. The energy generation sector is going down because of the RPS, whereas the transportation sector, efficiency, industrial emissions are projected to continue going up under current policies. Contrast that with things like agricultural emissions. Those are so minimal in Nevada that there's not a near-term need to focus on those. And so really this strategy is designed to identify those strategic near-term policies that need to be implemented in order to reach the goals, not necessarily a whole suite of things to be done at the same time. And Director Bobsey and Dr. Averitt, please chime in if you'd like to add to that.
All right, well, since they're not jumping in, let me just ask a broader question, and maybe this will help fill some gaps. But when we talk about zero emissions, I was assuming we're not talking about zero emissions across all different sectors. I'm thinking more just, the industrial transportation. I can't imagine we could ever get to zero total emissions, because that would drive things like agriculture out of the state. I mean, it's impossible to get to zero agricultural emissions as long as we have live animals that we're dealing with. So when we talk about zero emissions, what are we actually talking about? Is that a true zero, or is that relative to some standard?
Dr. Averitt, you want to jump in on this and explain net zero and that dynamic? Thank you.
So yes, Kristen Averitt for the record. So, kind of getting back to your prior question, I'm sorry I didn't jump in quickly enough, but to answer that as well as this one. In terms of if we were to implement every single one of those strategy or the 17 policies that we described, it would really depend on how those policies are actually designed, that in terms of what kind of emissions reduction would be achieved. But one thing we don't have in this state is we don't have access to all the data that we need to be able to appropriately catalog what kind of emissions reduction could be achieved if we were to implement all of those policies. We just don't have the data available at this point to do that. That said, tying into your next question about net zero, it is net zero. And there are opportunities in the sense that land use practices, for example, our forests and our landscape, they naturally sequester or they hold carbon. And so there's an opportunity through land use practices and really partnerships with agriculture, actually, to really help to maintain that carbon there that would offset perhaps a marginal carbon emissions. That said, zero is zero. And what's happening right now is we are adding carbon into the atmosphere faster than we can take it out. And until we get to that point where on balance, we're not pumping as much into the atmosphere as is being taken out, we will continue to realize the problematic impacts of climate change. So we really globally have to get to zero as soon as we can.
Sure, and I appreciate the distinction, because net zero is very different from true zero. We can't get to true zero. We have to kill all life on the planet if we get to true zero, because anybody that breathes is expending or expelling carbon dioxide, right? And I'm not trying, I know that I'm being a little extreme here, but that's the distinction I wanted to make sure that we're clear, because I think people miss that. Let me, Madam Chair, if I could just have one more follow-up. And that has to do with the standards that we're using when we get to net zero, particularly as we're talking about the portfolio standard. My hope is that we're getting to a point where we're talking about all energy sources, because I know when we were talking about the portfolio standards and the 2017 session, which I voted in favor of, I think it was important to distinguish at that time, we weren't talking about hydroelectric, even though it's a renewable source, because that would skew the numbers. We've got Hoover Dam in our backyard providing us with most of our energy. And so all of a sudden we automatically meet the standard. And I know that that wasn't the intent, but when we talk about this as well, I almost said global, but as a statewide solution, are we going to be looking at all of the sources, or just the chosen select few that we're focusing on and excluding things like the existing geothermal and hydroelectric sources? Is it an all hands on deck, all sources considered, or is this policy discussion about promoting certain others to the exclusion of the existing?
Chair Harris, this is David Bobstein from the Governor's Office of Energy, through you to Senator Pickard. Senator, this is an important question, and I think it really brings to light that the initial purpose behind the renewable portfolio standard, and of course Nevada was the second state to implement such a policy going back many years, was not around GHG reduction or climate imperatives. It was more the economic opportunity afforded to us, which is still tremendous and still remains around our domestic renewable energy resources. I think couple things to be responsive, just for your awareness of conversations that are happening. Certainly the dramatic shift that the legislature took last session between SB 254, the setting of its GHG reduction goals, we're able to already track tremendous GHG reduction in the electricity sector because of the renewable portfolio standard and the aggressive standard that we have. But going forward, once we get past the 50% RPS, and once we get to more of a measurement of can we get to a totally clean grid, these questions of what gets counted and how are going to become important. I think two things to watch. Nevada, along with a number of other Western states, and we're talking red states and blue states, there's an active regional conversation between energy offices, energy advisors at the state level, along with utilities, in acknowledgement that we have some differences between the states and also between different utilities that have their own sort of net zero targets as to how to harmonize all of those policies to make sure to eventually get us to a place where we have a common understanding of what the standard should be when it comes to electricity generation. I think that this is also going to become a very important conversation now that we're seeing federal interest in a clean energy standard of some sort. And so, I think Nevada is in a very good place when it comes to this, but and looking ahead into the future, these will be important conversations.
All right, but the question was, are we going to be counting the existing things like hydroelectric in this total equation? And so I think your answer was yes. Did I understand that correctly?
Well,
we're going to be looking at the totality of sources.
Sure. Senator Pickard, David Bobstein, for the record, yes. And again, I think that happens outside of the context of the RPS and how the RPS is calculated. We're looking at overall GHG emissions. And so, hydroelectric, there may be, ancillary services that produce GHG, but you're right. I mean, it's reduction of GHG is reduction of GHG. No matter your preferred flavor when it comes to electricity generation.
All right, thank you for that. And do we have any idea in the broad perspective what this is going to cost?
And Senator Pickard, I apologize, but I'm going to have to ask you to follow up on that last question offline. I've got 3 more members who want to ask questions. So please, Director Bobstein, if you could reach out to Senator Pickard about any estimated costs. I would appreciate that. Senator Spearman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you still hear me? A great presentation about the future and, well, exactly what we're doing now. I just have a couple of questions. The first one would be, have we identified any other resources for our renewable energy? And I'm speaking specifically about hydrogen fuel cells and geothermal. Have we looked at how we might move into that space eventually, even before 2050? First question.
Chair Harris, David Bobstein for the record, through you to Senator Spearman. 2 updates on those 2 energy sources you cited. I know you have an interest in hydrogen. You will be pleased to hear that Nevada is part of a Western hydrogen initiative of different state energy offices across the Intermountain West that are looking at green hydrogen applications and potential, whether it comes to long-term storage of renewable electricity generation through electrolysis, whether it's the transportation applications. It's a longer term project, but that is something that we're watching. When it comes to geothermal, we'll be hearing some more about this next week, but there was a pretty major decision that happened in front of the California Public Utilities Commission this past week, where in their planning portfolios for their resource plan, they had a significant bump up in both desired procurement of solar generation in Southern Nevada, as well as geothermal. There's certainly a lot of discussion and focus around the baseload aspects of geothermal, particularly after some of the blackouts that happened in the shortages that happened in California last year. So I still think that we're just on an upswing right now when it comes to interest in Nevada's renewable energy resources.
Thank you. And my final question, Madam Chair, with your indulgence. So a lot of these technologies, if we look back like 3 years, if we look back 5 years, if we look back 10 years, a lot of these technologies have really taken off in the last 2 years, and innovation. So my question would be, are we updating the information that you presented to us? And if so, how often? And within that question would be, if we're talking about hydrogen fuel cells, we're talking about infrastructure. Has there been any thought given to using existing infrastructure, gas infrastructure, as we begin to incorporate hydrogen fuel cells into our energy mix?
Chair Harris, David Bobsey, for the record, through you to Senator Spearman. I'll take the second part of your question, and then I'll probably turn it over to Director Kroll to come in as backup. That infrastructure question is front and center to this multi-state coalition. What is the future of infrastructure in the gas sector? Can there be an application of green hydrogen that can use that infrastructure for mobility? It's a little more complicated than just starting to transition with the existing infrastructure. There's technological issues that still need to be worked out. I think at this point, it's fair to say that, we've started the conversation, but we have a long way to go. But that is a long-term focus is how can across the West green hydrogen take on a larger role in our energy mix, in our clean energy mix.
And Chair Harris, to Senator Spearman, I'm going to let Greg Lovato take the first part of that question. Greg?
Thank you, Senator Spearman, Greg Lovato, NDP Administrator. So I think you raise a good point about, evolving technology and how we can appropriately capture that in the future to make sure that our projections of emissions reductions accurately reflect advances in technology. Unfortunately, that is one limitation of our inventory right now. It has some static assumptions about policies, as well, current policies, as well as technology. But there are available models and platforms that assume, a learning capacity and a technology improvement capacity that we can, take account for in terms of future GHG reduction, emission reduction opportunities. So that is something that we'd like to expand our capability on, not only to examine, comparative benefits of different policies, but also within existing policies, how we can, fully realize or recognize technology improvements.
Thank you. Thank you. And just last comment, I think part of the future of hydrogen fuel cells is in the transportation sector. So thank you, Madam Chair, for your indulgence. And thank you, Director Bobsey.
And I'll just, as we answer questions, go ahead and let everyone know it's perfectly fine to address the senators directly. We'll turn to Senator Hammond.
Thank you, Chair. A quick question. Actually, I think I have two questions and maybe a follow-up to the first one. I've had several conversations with my good friend, Senator Goycochea, who represents most of the rural areas. And of course, the rural areas, they have their set of challenges. But before I get into it, actually, I should step back just a second and say thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you for the information. as a young child of the 70s and 80s, I grew up in the gas shortages and all the energy crisis that we went through, and I think that we're well overdue for trying to change how we do things in this country and getting off of fossil fuels. I'm also one who's a little bit more, trying to figure out how do you do it and how do you do it, fast enough, but not too fast that you're hurting those that you're trying to help. And to that point, I'm going to get back to Senator Goicoechea and the conversation I had with him, that the rural areas dependent on some of these coal-fired plants that were mentioned by Mrs. Averitt, just not even knowing when we're going to be decommissioning them and slowing them down. A lot of rural areas have since got on to natural gas, trying to wean themselves off, but they're just starting off with natural gas. This ambitious plan is talking about the elimination of natural gas as we try to get to that net zero. Has there been, and I think I'm going to be getting to Senator Pickard's question actually, and that is, has there been a cost benefit analysis done with all of these, really large policy programs that you're talking about, specifically natural gas, in trying to figure out, how do we get away from them? And also the other big policy one was trying to, reduce the fossil fuels and creating and generating electricity. I'll let you go ahead and answer that, and then I'll probably have a follow-up and then one more question.
So Kristen Averitt for the record, thank you for the question, Senator Hammond. So with respect to cost benefit analysis, the way that we approach the strategy is we did lay out what it's costing other states and what investments they're making to implement those specific 17 policies for kind of as a comparison. But then we also laid out what the avoided costs would be in the future using the social cost of carbon. And those, I want to emphasize that social cost of carbon component, because it's not just about what's happening to the market. It is about public health, and it is about morbidity and mortality within the population. So, there are very real data behind some of this in terms of that cost benefit component. And we do know that the impacts of climate change, what we experienced with wildfires and air quality just this last summer, that's pretty much what we're going to be looking at with the baseline future moving forward, and it could get worse. And so those are the kind of things that we need to be thinking about in terms of what investments we make now and what happens in the future. But very specific cost benefit analysis, no, we didn't do that. We didn't have the opportunity to do that. I think I answered the question. I don't know if Director Bobzian has anything, or Director Kroll has anything to add into that.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Averitt. David Bobzian, for the record. Senator, I mean, you're absolutely right about the complexity of what's ahead of us when it comes to our energy mix and the reliance on energy that different communities have across Nevada. I think it's important to note that the economic discussions and analysis that go into energy governance right now are well established. I mean, certainly the Public Utilities Commission of Nevada, as they go through receive their filings and do the resource planning behind our electricity mix, these cost questions are obviously front and center to how they do that. And of course, of the two power plants, the coal power plants that were mentioned, one of them, Valmy, is subject to that whole process. And so that's the venue for determining, the cost of the asset, its continued operation, when is the optimal time for its retirement, et cetera, et cetera. And so there is a section that I think if no one reads anything else in the climate strategy, spending time with the complex issues section of the document is probably the most important. We have a whole section on the need for a transition from natural gas. We don't use the term elimination. We're not talking about ripping up people's gas lines. What we're talking about is this long-term transition and focus. And in fact, there is discussion of what should be considered in terms of how do you do the analysis, the cost-benefit analysis, to determine the future of the assets, the future investments that may or may not be taken to get us to that point, all while having the sensitivities for ratepayers across the state. So I hope that's a little clearer of a response in terms of the energy mix questions that I think you're very right to focus on.
And yes, and I do appreciate the answer, because I think we have to have that discussion. We need to know what you're thinking in terms of how the conversion happens and who's going to be paying, because one of the tenets of your plan is really about the climate justice portion of it. That there are some populations that are more adversely affected by this, which means that the cost will be borne by a different set of people in a different population of that sort of subset. And I think that everybody needs to know what the cost is going to be, or at least as close to an approximation of what that cost might be, because the typical ratepayer or the typical customer out there, eventually they're going to have to, for example, convert their appliances. My wife and I just bought a new dryer Friday, and I think it was a gas dryer. And eventually, in the next so many years, in order to meet those goals that we have, we're going to have to convert that appliance from natural gas to electricity. I mean, have you considered that? Have you been able to publish out to folks, this is what we're talking about as we transition, as you put it, transition from this to that? Because I think the goals are admirable, and I think we need to get there. I just don't know if we're too lofty, too quick, too fast in trying to mitigate the high cost. If there is a high cost, I think people need to know what that cost is going to be. So again, if you can answer those two, that one question.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Senator. I think it's important, again, David Bobstein for the record. I think it's important, again, that we reiterate that the strategy was not intended to be a list of BDRs that you just plug into a session and away you go and you've solved the climate problem. We know that this is a long-term discussion. We know that this is going to require more information. And I think policymakers in particular are in a complex environment right now where they're trying to figure out, okay, when do I have enough information to direct action on these various fronts? And I would say, particularly on the gas side of it, we have available to us, policymakers have available to them, existing models and analytical frameworks for making these sorts of long-term decisions, right? So if it's the Public Utilities Commission and the electricity sector is directed to meet some policy goals, they have the analytics, the tools, the understanding of the economics, the understanding on customers and the rate base as to how and when to time those various milestones along the transition. So, all these questions of replacement of appliances, future infrastructure development, I don't think you're going to get okay, here's the complete, next 20-year plan. Legislature, what do you think? Can you endorse this or not? I think it's steps you take along the way, and you task the Public Utilities Commission and others to figure out the details for it. And the opportunity here is to start the transition and start to put in place the guiding policies to get us there. Because you're absolutely right. I mean, all these things are very complicated, but there are also regrets if you don't start soon enough, or if you make additional decisions or investments along the way, you may find yourself in a more difficult position later on to make up the distance that you need to cover.
Madam Chair, if I may, or Senator Hammond, if I may just very briefly add on to that and speak a little bit more, just direct to you, and Brad Kroll for the record. For our near-term goals, particularly 2025, but also for 2030, if we're able to transition away from adding to our use of natural gas, we're not talking about taking it away from anyone or transitioning it away, but in new construction, providing those options for folks. If we're able to start transitioning effectively away from adding new natural gas in a sensitive way for the gas companies and consumers, we'll get to those goals in the near term, in the 5 and 10 year range. Beyond that, there is a transition for existing that's going to have to start to come into play. But in the near term, we're really talking about moving away from expanding those the use of gas and energy inputs that have greenhouse gas emissions.
Well, thank you very much. I think that answers everything. I think if there's any other questions, I'll take those offline. Like, if you're not using razors or shaving cream, if that actually helps save, greenhouse gas, that I'll find that out from Director Bobsey when I talk to him.
Thank you so much. We will go on to Vice Chair Brooks.
All right, I just quit laughing, so I can go on with my, my question now. Well, first of all, what NDEP has done, what the Governor's Office of Energy has done, and what Dr. Avert has done is better than I possibly could have imagined. Were the outcomes that we were looking for when I was sitting here drafting the bill that kind of envisioned a lot of this 2.5 years ago. And so it's just the work that's been done by the state of Nevada and all the agencies and all the folks I just listed, and the endless amount of hours put in is just this is a work product we can all be proud of, but it accomplishes so many things. And when my colleagues on this committee are asking, what's it going to cost? Well, that's a completely logical question to ask, and it's one that we should all be concerned with. And what this climate plan has done is created the steps that need to happen. And then we as legislators and policymakers get to decide when we implement the steps to get us there based on the most cost-effective ways of doing it. If I would have proposed a 50% RPS 10 years ago, not only would I have been laughed out of this building, we would have tripled your power bill. Now, doing it today, we have, by doubling our RPS in the last session, now we're seeing that it's not only doable, it is saving us money. We've reduced our power, the cost of our electricity in the state of Nevada every year for 5 years, while we've increased drastically the amount of renewables we brought on every year for 5 years. And so this gives us a menu of items that we can choose from, and then we can collectively and work with industry, pick the items that we need at the times that we need to do them. And as an example, if we made a $2 billion investment in transmission in the state of Nevada, we would see that we recovered over 50 years, we would see a minimum $10 billion of economic activity that in just 5 years. And so that is all to help us lower our carbon emissions. So those are the kinds of decisions, and the electrification of transportation. You've given us all these policy options we can choose from. You did not mandate we do any of them. And now we can pick and choose them as we're trying to reduce our carbon, but increase the economic diversification of our state and without displacing jobs that currently exist. And so this is everything I could have dreamed of and more, and you guys have done it all of you folks have done an amazing job. And it gives me and the rest of the senators on this committee and everybody in the legislature, it gives us some stuff we can choose from to really put good policy together without negatively impacting the economy of the state of Nevada. And if we play our cards right, creating a tremendous amount of economic value and activity in the state of Nevada. And just to answer Senator Pickard's earlier question, zero carbon energy of any sort, including hydro, is part of the current RPS. And that is because we're moving towards a zero carbon type of energy as opposed to incentivizing and encouraging a particular type of energy. And so we get very little of our energy in the state of Nevada from Hoover Dam, believe it or not, but all of it that we do get goes towards that RPS.
Okay, do we have any additional questions from members? Not seeing any, so I will let you all go. And again, thank you so much for the thorough presentation. Please be sure to follow up with members who expressed that they'd like some additional information. We will go ahead now and turn to the next item on our agenda, which is a work session on SB 17, which revises provisions governing motor vehicles. I'll turn it over to our policy analyst, Ms. Scully, for a short reminder of what that bill was about.
Thank you, Chair Harris. Senate Bill 17 was heard by this committee on February 8th. It was presented by the Department of Motor Vehicles. You'll recall that this bill primarily addressed driving schools and updated statutes by removing the requirement that driving schools have a physical bricks and mortar office. It also required and clarified the production of records upon the request of the Department of Motor Vehicles, and it set 3 years as the retention period for records. The measure also granted DMV some discretionary authority to renew instruction permits under certain circumstances. There were no amendments proposed and there was no fiscal impact of this bill. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. At this time, I'll entertain a motion on SB 17. What is the committee's pleasure?
So moved.
Second.
All right, I believe we have a motion from Senator Brooks and a second from Senator Pickard. Was that correct?
Senator Hammond moved.
We got a move from Senator Hammond and a second from Senator Pickard. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, since we're in this virtual world, we will be doing our votes by roll call. Secretary, will you please call the roll on this vote?
Senator Brooks,
Yes.
Senator Hammond,
Yes.
Senator Pickard,
Yes.
Senator Spearman,
Yes.
Chair Harris,
Yes, the motion carries. I will go ahead and assign the floor statement to Vice Chair Brooks. Moving right along, let's go ahead and open up the work session on SB 29. Ms. Scully.
Thank you, Chair Harris. Senate Bill 29 was also heard by the committee on February 8th and presented by the Department of Motor Vehicles. This bill involved entering into contracts, appointing persons to act as agents of the DMV for the purpose of issuing salvage titles, and also the collection of the required statutory fees. The bill sets forth the qualifications and also gave the department the authority to conduct audits and investigations as it deems necessary. There were no amendments proposed. This bill will require a 2/3 vote on the Senate floor. 2 fiscal notes were received from the DMV and the Department of Public Safety, both of which showed 0 impact over the biennium. Thank you.
All right, thank you. At this time, I will entertain a motion on Senate Bill 29.
So moved.
I'll second that, but I do have a question afterwards.
Okay, let's just note for the record, these both, actually, I should have clarified, are motions for due pass. So we have a motion from Senator Spearman and a second from Senator Hammond. And it looks like we're going to have some discussion on it. Senator Hammond.
Actually, I don't want to redo the whole bill. I just had a real quick question, and maybe legal counsel, committee counsel can answer. This was, I'm trying to find the right section 2, subsection 3C. After rereading the text there, I just wanted to see if that's sort of boilerplate. I think that it probably exists somewhere else in statute where we're actually authorizing somebody from our state to go out there if there's an office. I would anticipate that we're talking about maybe Copart or something like that, and they may have a national office somewhere else that if you have to go investigate or take a look at it, that's kind of boilerplate. I'd never seen that before, and I guess I never noticed it. I just wanted to see if that was my interpretation is it's boilerplate.
Ms. O'Grady?
I'd have to do a quick search. I mean, I'm not sure if we've got that from somewhere else. If you just give me a second, I'll look.
No need. We could take that later on. It was just, I was very curious. It has nothing to do with the bill. I'm supportive of the bill. I'll be voting yes on the bill. I just wanted to make sure I understood a little bit more of that language. I think it exists somewhere else.
And if you'll just follow up with Senator Hammond with that research once you have it available, that would be much appreciated. All right. So looks like we have a motion on the floor.
Madam Chair, I have a quick question, if I may.
Sure.
And it's an actual something that Senator Hammond just kind of spurred in my own mind. We talked about other agents partnering with the department to accomplish this sort of thing. Do we have to, and this is probably a question for Ms. O'Grady that can be taken offline as well, but do we have to statutorily authorize DMV to partner with third parties to do all of these things? Like we also talked about getting licenses renewed or is there authority within the department to partner with any third party to do their work?
Ms. O'Grady.
I'll check on that, but I do think we tend to give specific authority for these kind of things. So I don't think there's general authority.
All right, Madam Chair, I don't know if we have another bill coming up that would give us a vehicle to do this, but we might consider an amendment to give them kind of blanket authority to do that. But I'm not recommending that. I'm not proposing that. I'm just thinking that right now, under the circumstances, they need a lot of help. And if we have a vehicle to give them the authority to do that, this might be helpful.
All right, thank you so much. Will the secretary go ahead and call the roll or call for a roll call vote on this motion to do pass?
Senator Brooks?
Yes.
Senator Hammond?
Yes.
Senator Pickard?
Yes.
Senator Spearman?
Yes.
Chair Harris?
Yes, the motion passes. I would like to assign this statement to Senator Hammond. Okay, we have no committee BDR to introduce today, so we will move to public comment. BPS, will you open up the line?
Good afternoon, callers. To make public comment, please press *9 now to enter the queue. Once again, to enter the queue for public comment, please press *9 now. Caller with the last 3 digits of 836, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You may begin now. Once again, caller with the last 3 digits of 836, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You may begin now.
Good afternoon. My name is Jessica Ferrato, Jessica, F as in Frank, ERRA, T as in Tom, O, of Crowley and Ferrato Public Affairs, and today on behalf of Advanced Energy Economy. AEE is an industry association comprised of businesses dedicated to making the energy we use secure, clean, and affordable. We represent over 100 companies that include technologies such as energy efficiency, demand response, solar, wind, storage, electric vehicles, advanced metering infrastructure, transmission and distribution equipment, geothermal, hydropower, enabling software, among others. Used together, these technologies and services create and maintain a higher performing energy and transportation system, one that is reliable and resilient and diverse and cost effective, while also improving the availability and quality of customer facing services. AEE also represents large electricity consumers interested in increasing their purchases of affordable clean energy to power their operations in the state. I first want to applaud the governor and his administration and Senator Brooks for the ambitious undertaking that was the state climate strategy. The strategy identifies many critical policy priorities necessary to achieve Nevada's emissions reduction goals. AEE is particularly glad to see such an emphasis in the report on building and transportation electrification and regional power sector cooperation that will help Nevada reduce emissions while maintaining reliability and low-cost electricity. AEE members see huge economic development potential in the policies that the climate strategy lays out, which makes Nevada a top opportunity state for them to invest their resources, create new jobs, add to state and local tax revenues, and help consumers save money, be that through lower cost electricity generation, energy efficiency, and other demand side programs. They stand ready to invest and ready to help you shape these policies to ensure maximum economic benefits from the clean energy transition. These benefits aren't just theoretical. We've seen strong growth from these sectors in the past and fully expect them to drive economic recovery and diversification over the next few years and decades to come. The climate strategy policies allow Nevada to get ahead of the curve and reap the economic and job benefits sooner than later. Thank you for your time. Thank you to the governor's office and administrative staff. AWE looks forward to working with the legislature this session and beyond on climate strategy implementation. Thank you.
Caller with the last three digits of 155, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You may begin now.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christy Cabrera, CHRISTI-CABRERA. I am the Policy and Advocacy Director for the Nevada Conservation League. First of all, I just want to thank the Nevada Climate Team. NCL was able to participate in their listening sessions, and we were really excited to see the climate strategy come out in December. Nevada's climate strategy makes it clear that in order to meet our strong climate goals, we need to electrify transportation, move away from methane gas and other fossil fuels, and invest in green jobs. Nevada has a lot to be proud of in our work to move towards a clean energy future, but we can't slow down now. As home to some of the fastest warming cities in the United States, Nevada is already feeling the impacts of climate change. The Nevada Conservation League Education Fund recently released survey results that explore Nevadans' views on climate change and our state's response. The data shows that Nevadans understand the threat of the climate crisis and want to see leaders take bold, aggressive action to mitigate its harmful effects on our communities before it's too late. 82% of Nevada voters believe that climate change is a serious problem, and 67% believe it is already having a serious impact on this part of the country. Nearly 65% support lawmakers taking strong action to combat climate change and believe that taking action will have positive effects on our families, our climate and weather, and the economy. Nevada has made strides to become a cleaner and greener state, but we are still not on track to meet our climate goals, and there is still plenty of work to be done. We look forward to continuing working with the Nevada Climate Initiative team and the legislature to find solutions to this crisis. Thank you for your time.
Will the caller with the last three digits of 822 please slowly state and spell your name for the record? You may begin now. Once again, caller with the last three digits of 822, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You may begin now.
Emily Duff, E-M-I-L-Y, D as in David, U, F as in Frank, F as in Frank. Hi, members of the committee. My name is Emily Duff, and I'm a manager of state policy with Ceres. Ceres runs the BICEP Network, which is a coalition of nearly 70 major employers, leading consumer brands, and Fortune 500s, including many with operations in Nevada. Our members recognize that climate change poses a significant risk to the long-term economic success of the business community. Because of these risks, companies in Nevada and nationwide are making significant commitments to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, more than 1,000 companies have set comprehensive science-based targets to reduce their emissions, and approximately 200 of them are headquartered in the US. However, businesses are often constrained in how much they can do to drive down their total carbon footprint. Therefore, they have a significant interest in finding ways to systematically improve the emissions performance of the overall economy. Accordingly, there is an increasing need to adopt strong, comprehensive public policies that send clear long-term economic signals for addressing the risks that climate change creates. Today, I'm speaking to express our deep appreciation to Governor Sisolak and his administration for their time and effort in developing the state climate strategy, and to Senator Brooks for his leadership in the passage of SB 254 in 2019. The 81st legislative session provides an opportunity to put this comprehensive framework into action, and among other priorities, tackle Nevada's largest source of greenhouse gas emissions, the transportation sector. During a time of unprecedented health and economic crises, policies that accelerate the transition to low emission and zero emission vehicles present an opportunity to create financial savings for consumers and businesses, cut health costs by reducing smog forming emissions, and support economic development. We look forward to working with you this session to adopt policy solutions that provide significant economic and public health benefits to all Nevadans. Thank you.
If there are any more callers wishing to give public comment, please press *9 now at this time. All right, Chair, it doesn't appear that there are any more callers wishing to give public comment at this time.
Okay, great. I believe that will conclude the committee's business. Before we adjourn, are there any comments from members? All right, seeing none, our next meeting will be on 2/17, 3:30 p.m. sharp. I will see you all then. We are adjourned.
Thank you.